You guys, this Obi belt is straight fire, but for $990 for the leather and $750 for the denim one, I just couldn't even stomach it. I decided that I would try to upcycle it. Enjoy this DIY. Let me know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hi everyone, welcome to the Urban Sewing Society, where we bring fashion and creativity to your neighborhood. My name's Jen and I am the Urban Sewist. If this is your first time tuning into my channel, click that subscribe button below. Click on that bell so that you can get a reminder every time I release a new video. On this channel, I talk about fashion, refashioning, upcycling, DIY, thrifting. If that's the kind of content that you're interested in, then you are in the right place. So be sure to subscribe, because I know you all want to see some new upcycles. And so I've got a great one for you today. It is the Lovelies belt. You all know this belt retails for $990. Did you hear me? $990. Like, really? Super trendy. I couldn't imagine. Besides, I'm on 365 days of not buying any new clothing. Technically, this is an accessory, but I'm still not spending $990 on it, especially when you look at it and it's like, it's so upcyclable. Upcycle. Is that a word? I think that's a word. It might be a word. Anyway, it's my word. It is totally something that can be upcycled. I hope you will learn some tips and tricks from this video and try it out, and let me know if you try it out. Post in the comments, let me know. I absolutely love the way it turned. In fact, I love the way it turned out so much. I think I actually like mine way better. The one that I like the most, the blue denim and the black denim, like, I feel like both of those turned out so well. I think the key to this, something that I didn't mention in the video, is a heavier, more stiff denim. Also, if you want it to be even more stiff, you can iron on some interfacing on the opposite side, and that way you'll get a little more stiffness. But you can also fray the edges, you can add some embellishments. There is so much that you can do to create one of these Obi belts. So let's get right into this upcycle, and I hope you guys enjoy it. The first thing we're going to do is create a pattern, and you're going to use any kind of paper, 8.5 by 11 white paper or brown paper, whatever works for you. Take your waist measurements, and for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to work off of a 30-inch waist. So your waistband is going to be 30 inches wide, plus you're going to add about 1 to 2 inches for seam allowance. That means the full length of the belt will be approximately 32 inches. Add more if you want to be on the safe side. You'll notice in the video I cut mine too short and I had to add fabric. Now you can go ahead and cut. To create the center piece of the Obi belt, you will measure half of the full length of the belt band. That will be 16 inches up at the top. Now, of course, it'll be a little wider at the bottom because you've got the curve and the points and all that, but just so that you can make sure that it fits into the waistband, that middle piece is going to be about 16 inches. Now, you've got 4 pieces. You've got the center front, then the 2 side back pieces, and the waistband. From one corner of the center front to the other corner, that is going to be 16 inches. And that means the top portion and the side back is going to be 8 inches. You want to mark the pattern so that you know exactly what it should be. Now you're going to begin creating the pattern in real size. My suggestion is to create a rectangle and start from there. The rectangle will serve as your base. Now, if you want to do this freehand and you have no problem, then great. But many of us need a pattern, and I want to make sure that you can at least start out with a framework and you can create whatever you want from there. What I'm doing is making a rectangle that is 12 inches by 7 inches. I'm using the edge of my brown paper as the fold. As the middle, center, front, and the center front of the Obi belt, at the bottom portion is going to be 7 inches. So you've got 7 inches wide and 12 inches long. And I'm going to draw another line on the other side that is 12 inches and connect across the top. Once I've got that rectangle drawn, I'm going to begin putting the other measurements in. We said that the top of the center front should be 16 inches from one end to the other. Remember, we are creating this pattern so that it gets placed on the fold. That means you're going to measure from the edge of the paper out 8 inches and mark it. When you open it up, it'll be 16 inches. Now you're going to create the slant, and that slant on the side seam is really up to you. If you want it to be more pronounced, you could angle it more out. If you want it to be more straight, angle it more down. It does need to be on an angle, however, because remember, your hips are wider than your waistline in most cases, and you don't want the belt to be uncomfortable or fit too snug. Last part that we're going to work on will be the curve at the bottom. This is a bit more challenging. I like to use my curved ruler for this, so I'm starting my curved ruler right at the edge of the paper and the bottom of the front center. And this curve is going to be about 7 inches as well. It's interesting how all these numbers started to match up. So I'm going to take my curve ruler and curve it around just as much as I want. Now, you can make it more straight. You can make it more curved. You can cut it on an angle. It's really completely up to you. I'm just giving you the framework so that you can measure within that and make whatever design you like. Now I'm going to connect the tip of the curve and the tip of the slant to each other. I'm going to freehand this, but you can use your curve ruler if you like. I'll go back, mark the points of the pattern at the top of the fold and the bottom and the side seam. That way I won't lose track of any of my pieces. We're starting with these black denim jeans, and I cut the side seams first because the inside seam has that nice flat fell seam, and I wanted to use that as part of the design of the Obi belt. So I cut the jeans on the side and then I pressed them because they were pretty wrinkly. So once I cut the pieces and had 2 pieces, I laid one on top of the other and started to play around with how I wanted this design to look. Eventually, I folded over one leg, put the pattern piece on the fold, and cut around it. I made sure that that flat fell seam was right in the center of the Obi belt pattern. Then I had to figure out how and where was I going to cut the back pieces from. Now remember, the back pieces are not cut on the fold. They could be, and you can just cut the fold, but I decided to use the pockets as part of the design feature. So I folded the pockets over to match up each other. And if you notice, in the back of jeans, you have that line right above the yoke, which also has a flat fell seam. I used that as a little extra so that I could turn under the hem, and then I traced around my pattern. Now you see I have that little corner left that is left over and needs some fabric. So once I cut this pattern out, so I evened off that corner, and then I took another piece of denim fabric and I created that point at the bottom of the Obi belt. And I just, since this is an upcycle, I just stitched over it. I didn't make any real nice seam. I didn't do anything special right here. I simply laid the pattern back on top of the original piece that I cut, took some of the denim, put that right in the corner and pinned it together, cut around it, very simply made the point, pinned it together, and when I took it to my sewing machine, I just simply stitched on top of it. And you'll see when I get to the sewing machine how I finished off those corners. It was fairly easy to fold over the corners so that they would have a nice finished look. Now, if you have a larger pair of jeans, you will not have a problem adding that extra on the tip because the jeans will be wider and you'll have more room and you won't have to add this little extra piece. But this is what I had to do for mine. Now to cut the waistband. Now I wanted to use that inside seam of the jeans on the waistband. I wanted that to be right in the middle. So what I ended up doing was taking my pattern piece, laying it out, and I cut the full length, but I came up short. You'll see later in the video where I ended up having to go back and cut 2 pieces of black denim and stitch them onto the ends. So first I start with that tip and sew that down. Then I folded back the fabric right by the yoke, stitch that down. Then I stitched the side seams. I also did a top stitch on the side seams. And then I turned under the edge because I didn't want it to be a raw edge, and I turned under my corners and created a nice clean finish at the bottom of the Obi belt. Now here I'm adding those extra inches on the sides of the belt, and it didn't really bother me that it didn't have the seam because that was going to be in the back. All right, now I am pinning the belt to the bottom portion, and then I'm going to do a top stitch on the top portion of the belt and fold that over. This belt is so super easy to do. I also created out of 2 strips of black denim from the jeans ties to go in the back, and you can add those any kind of way you want. You can just stitch them down or you can use belt loops. Now I'm moving on to the vinyl. Basically, it's the same thing. The vinyl is a lot easier. It cuts a lot easier. You don't have to worry about any lines from it being stitched together. I simply used my chalk pencil and drew around the outside of the patterns, and I'm assembling this the exact same way. I started with the side seams. I used these little clips instead of pins so that I wouldn't poke holes into the vinyl. And the vinyl was relatively easy to sew. When you're sewing on the wrong side, the vinyl is really easy to sew. When you're sewing on the right side, you have to pull it through a little bit, and you'll see that a little later. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind is if you have vinyl that's dark like this, but it has a white back, you might consider putting a lining in. When you see my final try on, you can see the white up underneath. It didn't really bother me that much, but if you are really picky like that, then you may want to sew a lining onto the back of this belt. Now here I am determining where the middle of the belt is. I folded the top portion of the belt in half, put those together, and now I am going to stitch together. And I came up short here on this belt as well, so I had to add a couple inches onto the end. Once I added those on, I was ready to attach the top to the bottom, and it fit together perfectly. Sewed all the way around, and I did the same thing on here that I did with the denim belt, where once I attached the top to the bottom, I did run a top stitch across the top of the belt. Now this is where I ran into a little bit of difficulty because the vinyl was getting stuck to the foot, and so that's what you want to be careful of. I took 2 other pieces of vinyl and I made these belt loops in the back, and you'll be able to see them a lot more clearly at the end of the video. I stitched those down, and that's where I used to close the belt up in the back, and I really like the way those 2 came out. They came out looking really, really nicely. All right, now on to the last belt, or the second to the last belt. This one is so super easy, and there's so many varieties that you can get out of it. Use a basic jacket, men's jacket, women's jacket. I used a jacket that was a little bit oversized. I measured how wide I wanted this belt to be. I used some double fold bias tape because I wanted to make it super, super easy. I didn't have any blue, so I ended up using black. After I cut the bottom off the jacket, I used the double fold bias tape and I stitched it to the top. I realized that it was really, really wide, and I'm kind of small, so I cut some inches off the top and I created an extra belt to go on top, and you'll see that at the end. Now we're going to this pair of blue denim jeans. I used 2 pairs of denim jeans because I wanted a 2-tone Obi belt. So I started with the 1 pair and I laid out my waistband, keeping in mind that I was going to need a little bit extra. So this time I moved it up so that I could accommodate that extra fabric that I was going to need. And I went back and adjusted my pattern later. And that's one thing. You can create this out of a muslin sample first, and then that way you can get all of your mistakes out of the way. So the second thing I did was I removed the waistband from the jeans and kept the belt loops, and I'll show you what I did with those later. I cut these 2 pieces and I left myself a little extra so that I could turn it under for the hem. I cut the front and I cut the back and put the front on the fold like you see here, and I also ran that flat bill seam through the middle the same way I did on the black. Now I'm cutting the rest of the legs open, laying the other pair on top of each other, and I'm using the back piece to have a contrasting color. So the back piece ends up being dark and the front piece ends up being light. And so I like to have that little contrast. And again, I gave myself a little extra so that I could accommodate for the seam allowance. All right, so once I trimmed that all off and put the waistband together, I cut the belt loops off the other pair of jeans because I knew I was going to need those extra ones to close up in the back. And I started with the front part of the belt. It actually has a seam going down the front. I opened up that seam and I stitched on each side, and I used thread to match the thread that was in the denim jeans already. And then I started working with the front of the belt. I matched up the sides on the angles and stitched those down, and I also did a top stitch there as well. I really like the way this one ended up coming out. Remember, after you sew, you need to press right away. So same thing on the other side, another top stitch, and now to attach the belt to the bottom portion. Now you can see here where I have the contrast, the lighter portion around the waistline and the darker portion at the bottom. I stitched all the way from one end to the other end, and I did the same thing that I did on the previous 2 belts where I ran a top stitch across the top. And that just gives you a nice clean finish. I love the way this one turned out. I trimmed off the bottom, I turned under the edges, and I ran a hem around the bottom. I evened off the back side, and then I turned that under and began to attach the belt, the waistband from the jeans to the top of the belt. And I thought I was going to leave a little space in between, but I ended up buttressing them up right next to each other. And once I did that, everything fit together perfectly, and I ran a zigzag stitch all the way from one end to the other to hold those 2 pieces together. So what I ended up having to do is make my zigzag stitch really wide so that it would catch the waistband as well as the belt. And it looks like it was made that way. I went back in and I stitched down the belt loops. You have to be very careful when you're stitching down the belt loops because that fabric is really thick and you don't want to break a needle. So depending on your machine, you might have to exercise some caution. I added the 4 extra belt loops on the back, and that was what I was going to use a men's tie to tie together. And so here's my little mini fashion show. I am wearing the vinyl Obi belt here, and this one is the denim, the black denim, which is maybe my second favorite. I do believe that my favorite is probably the denim belt, but I love the way this came out. I love the pockets on the back. I think it was a really nice design feature. I then also paired the black Obi belt with a very colorful blouse that I have, and I really like the way it made it pop. It just looks so super cute. I love it. I really love it. And then next you'll see the denim Obi belt, which, you know, by far I think is probably my favorite. I used a men's tie in the back to hold it together, and I have on this blue men's shirt that can be worn as a dress, or you can wear shorts under it for the spring. I wanted to give you a little peek into spring, even though I'm wearing boots here. I just really like the way this one turned out. I think it's super cute. You can also change the way the bottom looks. You can make it round, you can make it jagged, you can make it frayed. There's so many options with this belt. All right, well, thank you so much for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you back here next week for some more upcycles. See you later. Bye.